Hello, everyone. Good morning. For me, at least in Brazil, and good afternoon for you all in Europe, in all the countries that registered for our webinar. We are very welcoming you to our second webinar, the AI BPI Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Today, we're talking about increasing diversity in innovation. Before you get started, I would like to give you some instructions. Questions to the speakers can be submitted via Q&A box. It's down below your video. Q&A session will be at the end. For technical problems, please send a message to the chat box to AIPPI events. There is a brief survey after the webinar. Please, we'd like you to help us completing it, and thank you for your feedback. Before we started, I would like to make a small introduction of our amazing panelists for today. We have Julio Raffo. He's head of the Innovation Economy section of the Department of Economics and Data Analytics of the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Before joining WIPO, he conducted research at the EPFL in Switzerland, the French International University, and the Pan American Health Organization, and the Red Ibero-Americano de Indicadores de Ciência y Tecnología. He holds an economics degree from the Universidad de Buenos Aires, a master's degree in industrial organization, innovations, and intellectual strategy, and a PhD in economics from the Université de Paris Norte. His main research interests are the economics and metrics of innovation and intellectual property, with a particular focus on their intersection with society economic development. Following, we have Roberta Romano Gotti. She is Chief Sustainability Officer at the EPO and is passionate about UN SDGs and ESG. Prior to that, she has served as Chief Operating Officer of the sector Healthcare, Biotechnology, and Chemistry, and earlier of the sector of Mobility and Mechatronics, where she was responsible for leading more than 1,600 patent examiners, managers, formalities, and administrative staff in Munich, Berlin, and The Hague. Roberta is a chemistry by education and has obtained her PhD in organic chemistry from the Technical University of Munich and was RD product manager at the Procter & Gamble before joining EPO in 1997. She's an experienced mentor and has contributed to the shaping of the diversity and inclusion program at EPO that she coordinates since July 2022. Finally, but not least, Esteban Santamaria has worked in private, public, and academic and international sectors. He has served as the consultant specialized in intellectual property innovation and creative economic for the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, where he published studies such as the book Intellectual Property Rights and Public Policies for the Creative Bank, for Creative Economy, Recommendations for Latin America and the Caribbean. He has also been a consultant for Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. He's the director and founder of the Mexican think tank Caino, as well as the international IP consultant. He earned his master's degree in intellectual property law at the George Washington University with the support of prestigious Fulbright scholarship. He holds a law degree and a master's degree in economic law from the Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla, graduating with the highest distinction cum laude. He's a doctor in government sciences and politics, and he holds a diploma in artificial intelligence and intellectual property from the Center for International Intellectual Property Studies of the University of Strasbourg. Now, different that we are used to, we will manage this webinar as a conversation. We talk with our panelists about these important themes they're dealing with at work and around the world. First of all, we start with Julio. Julio, WIPO's work and research on the gender gap is patenting has been ongoing for quite some time. In fact, WIPO published its first report on the gender gap in patenting in 2016, and its second report entitled The Global Gender Gap in Innovation and Creativity last year. tell us why WIPO got started in this work and the methodology used for your data collection analysis, please.
Thank you, Dala, and thank you all for being here. Well, I would say two basic things. Why we did this? Well, because we believe this is a very important topic. Roberta, we know she's passionate about SDGs. I think everybody in this meeting, we are very worried about some of the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly number 5, which is the one about gender equality. And you know, we wanted to provide a metric that could guide policymakers. Our main goal at WIPO is basically to support our member states and to give them elements for them to take decisions. So we were approached by our back then gender focal point and was asking, hey, can we measure gender in patents or in IP? And we say, okay, we can try. And there is where we actually faced some of the main challenges that probably everybody in this conversation always faces, is how we can measure this. And we came up with this methodology, which is not the perfect one. And we documented that work that you mentioned in 2016, that to really measure gender, ideally we would need to go to the inventors themselves, right, to the applicants themselves, and that's the best way of measuring it. But it's hard, and there are many reasons why we don't do that. So we go for the second best, that we have we call our a World Gender Name Dictionary, which is basically a very long list of names, given names of people and gender, but of course, which is tailored by country and by region, trying to be as comprehensive as we can, right? Not as much as we want. And with that, we can establish, we can attribute gender, or actually what we call sex disaggregated data, to our inventors and our applicants in our own collection in PCT, but actually in any collection. And that's one of the most rewarding things that we did, is this methodology actually has been used by many IP offices, and even in the conception was conceived together with the UK IPO, the UK IP office. And that's very rewarding for us when we see that many people are interested in the topic and trying to measure and getting results. I think the only element to say, because I'm taking a bit too long on this, is that also there's a second challenge, and we're going to see that in the discussion of today, I guess, is what to measure, right? Once you find how to measure it and having these decisions, is what are the best metrics and so on, we make a case in our report of working with two main metrics. One of them is better than the other one. We call it the women inventor rate, or basically is from all listed inventors, how many of those are women. And the other one is patents or any kind of IP with at least one woman participation in that, particularly as an inventor. These two metrics are very interesting. Both are communicating more or less the same thing, that things are improving in the world about this, and in most countries are improving as well. However, not as fast and not reaching parity. So we are far from parity on that. In our latest result, we have that 1 every 3 patents have at least one woman participation, like 30%. And we have that the participation of women is about 16% in the listed inventors. So 1 out of 6 is not great, but it's getting better. It was much worse 20 years ago. I think I spoke already too much. Let me go back to you.
No, it's okay. It's perfect. I'll keep it with you then.
Okay.
In last year's report, after looking at data from 2 decades of patents filings in all the countries of the world, you found that 23% of patents include at least one woman as a listed inventor, and 96% of patents included at least one man as an inventor. You also found that 4% of international patents were invented exclusively by women, either as a single inventor or a team of inventors. In terms of innovation, women generated, as you said, 1 in 10 patents, while men produced the other 9. Were you surprised by these results?
So I was not as surprised as I was disappointed, right? But as we were saying, we're already researching this almost 10 years now. And there's always a glass half full and half empty, or more than half empty in this case. So I'm definitely not surprised at this point, but I'm a little bit disappointed in the sense that we know women can be more present in the IP system and in the patent system in particular. And we know this because we know they're more present in previous stages of the IP system, right? If you look at women studying engineering and so on, they have been improving over time, and in some of the most advanced degrees that can lead eventually to a patent, particularly PhD in STEM, you observe also that women participation has increased substantially. Yet there's no parity there as well, right? It depends, and some people, they like to call this the leaky pipeline. So in that sense, the IP system, the patent system in particular, seems to be one of the latest stage where we lose women in that pipeline, and it's not desirable. So in that sense, unfortunately, I think we cannot be surprised. However, yeah, I was expecting that that we can do better as a society, for sure.
Yeah, a long way to go yet, but yeah. Turning back to Europe, Roberta, now it's your time to bless us with your ideas and datas. The EPO has also been looking at the landscape of women inventors. Could you share with us some of the main findings?
Yes, thank you, Vaidala, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. It's great to be here and be accompanied by Julio and Esteban, such a great panel. Yeah, indeed, Vaidala, in March, we published the Patent Index for 2023, which for the first time included statistics on women inventors. And we focused mainly on European patent application from the EPO 39 countries, naming at least one woman as inventor. So one of the two metrics Julio was referring to. And what it shows is that European patent application from EPO countries had 27% of applications named at least one woman as inventor, which I think correlates nicely to the 23% that Julio mentioned just before. Now, what we saw is that the rate varies significantly across the countries. We see big differences. For example, Portugal with 52%, and Spain with around 46% of application naming at least one woman inventor. Around 30% for the Nordic countries, which was a bit of a surprise, and Germany 22%, Austria 17%. We can develop later this argumentation and the why, but certainly perhaps not an expected result. Now, in November 2022, we also published a study, chief economist study, on women participation in inventive activity, where we investigated how often women inventors are named as inventors in European patent applications from EPO countries. So that's the other matrix Julio was referring to. And we covered the period end of the 70s to 2019. And I must say that the results between Patent Index and the study are really quite consistent, which again confirms what Julio was mentioning before, although the matrix, again, are slightly different. So I think the first good news is that the percentage of women inventors in the last 40 years, from 1970 and the 1970s to 2019, so the so-called women inventor rate has been increasing. And that has been increasing from 2% in the late 70s to more than 13% in 2019. We're speaking about the EPO countries. Now, the study also shows how Europe is positioned. So the EPO countries are well above Japan. Japan is around 9.5%. Europe, we said 13%, but remains below the US with 15%, and is well below the People's Republic of China and the Republic of Korea, both around 27, 28%, which shows that there is a lost opportunity for Europe's innovation performance. So there's something to be done there.
Okay, great. Julio, taking consideration of what we already said and what Roberta brought to us, do you have some thoughts on what is causing the gap between the rate of women inventors and the women's share of patents?
We have some intuitions, right? It's hard to have a full causality at this stage, although more and more economists, including ourselves, are trying to look into it. But what Roberta was saying, and that's something quite interesting for us researchers, is that the work that we are doing at WIPO, what colleagues are doing at EPO and even EU IPO for not patents, but designs and trademarks, and definitely many of the national offices, the main, let's say, stylized facts of those studies are very, very consistent, right? We observe this, which we're already mentioning, the idea that rates are not great, but however, they're improving over time. We observe the more international studies, like Roberto was mentioning, we observe that Asia is performing quite well, but mostly because of Republic of Korea and China. This being said, I always insist that our methodology, and most methodologies out there, when they measure China and Korea, they suffer a bit more of uncertainty because names are a little bit more unisex than they are in other countries, and that's one limitation of our methodology. One interesting thing is also this element about some countries and some regions, like Roberto was mentioning, Portugal and Spain. We find the same thing. Latin America, and Esteban was going to say a few words about that, I guess, as well, is also doing relatively well in those indexes. United States. And when you look inside that, and that's what many researchers try to understand better, is it seems that there's some factors like industries, or if you want, fields where the patterns are coming from, are quite determinant of the rate. We observe that usually life science, so inventors working in life science, for instance, biotech, pharmaceuticals, to name a few, they're way more inclusive, they're way more participation of women in those patterns than if you go to the other extreme, will be more classic engineering, right? Everything that has to do with engines, combustion engines, transport, this is where you observe the least. In both sectors, you observe a progress. So that's the good news. However, there is a big gap between these two. A lot of that is explained also of what I was mentioned before, right? The pipeline, the degrees. You observe less women in those classic engineering schools than you observe in life science. Another important element that is worth mentioning is the type of applicant. For some reason, private companies seem to have less representation of women than academic institutions. So universities or public research organizations often have a better balance. It's still not 50-50, but a better balance than private companies. And unfortunately for the world, maybe fortunately for innovation, but unfortunately for the gender parity, the companies are the largest contribution, right? The main stakeholders, as we know very well in AIPPI, the participation of companies is instrumental for the ecosystem of the patent system. So, but they don't do as well as the academic sector in terms of women participation. So that's another element. And there is I would say, a third element that we have observed, which has to be a little bit with the dynamics of the group of inventors. And as I'm probably going to speak a bit more about that later, I can tell you about that later. But those three dynamics, right, the field, the institution, and also the group dynamic, seems to play a very important role of, at least to predict what will be the share of women participation. The underlying causes, of course, deserve more research.
Great. And what about you, Roberta? What is the reading of the EPO numbers?
So no surprise here. Again, I totally agree with Julio. He pointed out exactly the three main points. I'd like to elaborate just a little bit more on these ones. So we said, first and foremost, the women who choose any type of career, what we see is that especially those who choose a career in STEM face tougher selection than men do. And that's consolidated data that we find also in the studies. And this is linked to what Julio mentioned, leaking the pipeline phenomenon, where we see invisible barriers filtering out women, STEM graduates, first from research jobs, and then subsequently from the upper scales of their organizations. So typically, we see that women in academics or senior R&D staff are really rare compared to the rate of STEM students. So this underrepresentation when they come higher in the organization suggests that that women, filter off during their whole career, professional career. The second point that Julio made was women at universities. We see through studies that they have fewer links to industry and are confined to a more traditional academic career models than men. So we have seen available evidence showing that women academics submit about 40% less patent applications than men, although a similar scientific productivity. In addition, and that's really interesting, when it comes to inventions that are both described in scientific publications and also patented, we see women credited as authors in the publication less likely than their co-authors, men colleagues, to be credited an inventor role in the corresponding patents. So just to keep in mind, especially as we have the IP ecosystem watching us, that this is something to really look into. This low recognition extends when we come to the business R&D, where women earn less than men, although they contribute as much to the development of high-quality inventions. And finally, I can only reiterate what was mentioned by Julio about the industrial sectors of a country. So the industrial landscape does have a big impact. So Germany, for example, who has mainly a landscape dominated by automotive industry, and so mechanical engineering has a deficit of women, because we know that women are represented by 16% only women inventors in this field. Equally, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, who are very much on data science and again electronic engineering, have a lower, by default, already a lower rate. Whereas Portugal and Spain, who are very much on medical technology and pharmaceuticals, which we know are the ones with the highest rates, do have more women inventors. Of course, it's not the full picture, and on top of that, there are socioeconomic elements, cultural elements that come into play. If we base on the facts and the numbers, that's an addition that I could offer to Julio's points.
Great. It's really curious to hear all these different gaps. The next 3 questions are going to be to Esteban. Esteban was, now it's your time. You're prepared to talk about a little bit of Latin America and the Caribbean. One of the big problems of the Latin American and the Caribbeans is absence of statistical information about intellectual property at a subnational level. Why do you think this is still happening in 2024?
Thank you, Itala, for happy sharing the floor with Julio and Roberta. And thank you for being here. Well, there are several aspects that maybe we should consider at the time of answering this question. The first is, in my understanding, after working with this project, is that unfortunately in Latin America, there's still a problem of explaining, especially the high level of governments, how the IP can be used as a tool for development. And this is generating a kind of negative repercussion in terms of how sometimes the government or even private sector or universities or the other sectors in the countries, in Latin American countries, consider the IP as a very important tool for several aspects. So the consequence of not understanding how the IP is working as a tool for development and growth reduces its importance at the national level and the subnational level. So what we sometimes do is only try to bring the knowledge and the know-how from developed countries. And there is this sense that we only need to provide some kind of classes or general seminars in order to promote the generation of innovation / inventions. So this is one of the biggest problems. So normally, for example, some of the countries, they lack of statistical information also because the strength of the Latin American IP offices are really low. So they do not have the human resources sometimes for having people in charge of generating and gathering all this information. The absence of enough public funding for those institutions is one of the problems. The other is that very few universities in Latin America have people or academics working only in the IP field. Very, very, very few universities. In very few universities, you can find people that are conducting this kind of research from the academic perspective. So if we don't have this kind of people doing this kind of research, of course, there is also not the possibility of having this kind of statistical information. And maybe the last reason is because we have in Latin American countries very few women inventing, so the data is the results are really low, sometimes are really bad. So there's like this kind of political perspective in terms that sometimes the IP offices, in my experience, feel that there is this political attack that they will say, hey, this government is not supporting enough the women, so that's why we have very few women inventing. So and then you can support this argument with some statistical information. So in order to avoid this kind of political attack, it's better not to have this statistical information to say, hey, this IP office is having, or this country is having very few women. So this is perhaps the other reason that we identify by talking with some colleagues during the process of gathering the data.
Nice. I think you quickly said what I'm already answered what I'm going to ask you, but can you make more clear about when you were talking about this kind of research? Do you know what the challenges, particularly in obtaining and gathering data of women patent in Latin America? You're on mute.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
Well, there are several problems. One of the big challenges that we identify is the difficulties for obtaining the data. There is, for example, the best case scenario in terms of obtaining the data. For example, Colombia, which in which case you can call through the IP portal and then identify one Excel sheet, and you see the names, and you can download the document and then apply all the code we generate for this program, for this project, and use the tool of gender software that in the database that Julio and his team produces, that definitely was the most important use for the work. But there is the other opposite side. In countries in where you need to request to the government, and you need to file a request, and also you need to pay in order to obtain this information, and you also need to be a national of this country. Otherwise, there is no way you can obtain this information. So in most of the cases, I can say that those are the two limits. Most of the cases, most of the countries are in the middle. So in terms of obtaining the data, we face several problems. And perhaps the most typical problem is that we didn't, we asked for information, and most of the government told us that they do not have the information. They do not have the names. So perhaps this is the biggest problem that we identify in order to obtain the information, because at the end of the day, without the names and from information from the patents, it is impossible to have information and to use our software in order to obtain the names of how many women are inventing. So perhaps this is the biggest problem.
Okay. And as part of Caino and GLIPA, they had this study conducted by them that was pioneering in identifying the number of women patent at the subnational level for countries. What are the key findings?
Well, one important thing that I forgot to mention is that the difference between the work that the WIPO, the amazing work that the WIPO and the EPO conducted, is that we try to go at the subnational level. So this is very important, because this is also the part in which we as an NGO try to support and collaborate the amazing work that the WIPO and the EPO are conducting. So the first is maybe that unfortunately, if we see the statistics, and you can see it in the document that is online, the number of women inventing in terms of only women is more or less the same in the 4 countries we cover in our study. After 4 or 5 years of work, it's more or less the same percentage of women inventing. Nevertheless, one of the other aspects that we identify, and the second is that the number of women collaborating with men is increasing, which is really good because you can see that there is this collaboration. And this is important because the focus of this project was to highlight the only information, but we try to be very careful in not saying this is a fight between men and women. This is not the perspective we wanted to show. The idea is to only to provide the data. And in this case, again, one of the results is that the number of mixed team or collaboration between men and men is increasing. And this is really, really, really good. And this is affecting, in terms of data, the number of inventions produced only by men. So this collaboration, again, is good. Then, and the third aspect is that the number of women as inventors is increasing also. And we also listed it in the number how increasing in the years we covered. And finally, one of the other aspects that we identify is the gap within the countries. So we have in case, for example, basically in all the cases, in Brazil, for example, in Rio or Sao Paulo, or in case of Mexico, Mexico City, Nuevo León, Jalisco, there are very few states concentrating most of the inventions. And we're talking about men and women and all the kind of invention. For example, Mexico City concentrates more invention of women than the other 50% of the states, men and women in general. So this is very interesting. The gap within the states is really high. So this is also very important because sometimes when we talk about IP policies, we talk at the national level. But after this document, I think it is also important to talk about at the subnational level because we are leaving behind at the subnational level several states, and this is not good at the end of the day.
As a Brazilian, I can relate a lot with what we said, and thank you for your words. Coming back to WIPO and Julio. One finding common to the WIPO report and the EPO study I thought was particularly surprising was that in Nordic countries, namely in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, the number of women listed as inventors and the WIR was much lower than I expected, especially given the countries are well known to provide more and equal opportunities for women. Do you have any theories on why the number of women listed as inventor in these countries is so much lower than expected?
Well, when you asked me about if someone surprised me, I think when we did the first study in 2016, we went back and checked the numbers several times because we were not expecting that, right? In usually more Mediterranean countries and definitely some Latin Americans are expected to have a more, let's say, less feminist tradition, at least on the perception of people. That doesn't mean that, and it was very interesting that we were not observing that in the data exactly, especially if you pick some of the Nordic countries, even Germany and so on, that don't perform as our preconceptions maybe before the study we're doing. And again, this was quite ratified by other studies. So that's interesting because at least it's consistent. If we are doing a mistake, everybody's doing the same mistake. Let's put it this way. But so what is behind it? It is tricky. Part of what's behind it, what I mentioned before, right? The industrial specialization and the composition of private versus academic / public sector participating in the IP. That's a big part of the explanation, but that's probably not the only explanation. What I can tell you, and this is in some extent related of what Esteban was saying before, there is also a dynamics of groups participation, right? And there are some technologies that are slightly more complex than others, and not everybody can do it. And this means that only certain private companies can go in there, right? Compared to the more academic and public sector. So that could be part of the explanation, but definitely more needs to be done. Where we should be looking is probably on the incentives, right? There is one argument I have discussed with colleagues from UNESCO, for instance, and they strongly believe that could be part of the explanation. It has to do with the incentives within a household, right? Usually in a household, you have a first and a second salary because of whatever happens, career progressions, opportunities, and so on. And unfortunately, due to historical, structural, I would say, discrimination, typically the woman was the second salary in that household. Is by no means something that is desirable, but statistically it has been like this. If that's the case, it's not unlikely that women will self-select themselves into employments where there is more flexibility of time, where there are other things that you need to do in order to maintain that household up and running, especially if you have kids. And that could explain in some aspects why women are more present in academia, and of course patenting more in academia. So, but that needs to be tested, and this is just an hypothesis which is untested. So one thing that should be maybe look at, if it's women where there is more let's say social tissue or more nurseries, right, more infrastructure to help them, if that will imply for them to participate more highly in the private sector, then you will not see. These are part of the big questions that I think all of us need to answer, right? Esteban, Roberta, myself, and everybody probably participating here. We need to go and try to understand what is making this so different, because we were not expecting that result.
Okay, keeping with you, like the APO, the WIPO report also looked at the gender gap across regions, sectors, and industries. I found it fascinating that Latin American and the Caribbean experienced an increase in women inventors over time from 16% in 2001 to 2005 to 21% in 2016 to 2020, probably as Esteban quickly said before. Any thoughts as to what contributed to this increase?
So partially, what that would, we look at it, and it's not surprising that in those countries the proportion of academic patenting is much higher, right? If you pick on average a Latin American country, you will observe that 80% of their patenting is coming from the public sector, while only 20% is from the private sector. And you will see, let's say in Europe and or at least in the most industrialized countries within Europe and certainly United States, you will observe the opposite kind of ratio, right? And this clearly correlates also with the data you can get on expenditures in research and development, right? Typically, the private sector is not as present in Latin America and let's say Egypt, just to name a few, as you will observe, let's say in Germany or even some of the Nordic countries you were mentioning before, and certainly the United States. So that is clearly part of the explanation. Also, if you look at what kind of specializations they have, you will observe that they have a disproportionate amount of life science patents and much less in some of the engineerings. So that's also what explains that gap. And I would say this is something that we have not tested or not tested a lot in our end, but it's very interesting what Esteban was just saying before, is the differences across the territory, right? Some of these countries that we're mentioning, they have very large territories. And also they are known for having very populated big cities. So I think implicit on also what Esteban was saying, there is this, if you allow me the very, I think, old-fashioned rural versus city divide, you will observe some economic studies. You would expect women to participate more in patenting in big cities than in rural areas. So because of that, I think the composition of all the effects I mentioned before explain this performance. Again, so in some aspects, coming from Latin America, I'm very proud of that performance, but also I think we need to be very conscious that a lot of that is a little bit of an artifact because of all of this. And actually, we have one study that we did, we still not published, hopefully we're going to publish very soon, with our colleague Elodie Carpentier that now left WIPO, where we try to analyze which of these aspects contribute the most to explaining the gender, right? If we can understand that. And all of these things together, at most, they explain about 60-65% of the gender gap. There's 25% that everything that we have mentioned so far we don't know what it is, right? And that means that we need to research more. That ultimately means that.
Okay, thank you, Julio. And talking about Latin America and the Caribbean, Esteban, one of the key findings is the increase of collaboration between women and men, as you said, while patents with only men as inventors have reduced in most states. Why do you think this is happening?
Well, I think that one of the aspects here is that this myth that STEAM areas in the university are only or mainly for men. This is one of perhaps one of the most important changes. I remember studying several years ago in the university and having the chance only of seeing very few women, maybe 10% of women in this kind of schools or careers. In the last 10 years, you can see the difference and the number of women studying this kind of in these areas. This is one of the first things. The other aspect is that the new generations, in our understanding, is that they are breaking little by little this idea that the women are not part of this kind of careers or areas, STEM areas. So the new generations grew up with this perspective of collaborating men and women. So for them, it is easier to keep collaborating in the higher level. I'm talking about university or master degree or a PhD, because they grew up with the idea of collaborating with women. And this is very, very important. And third is that activities such as this kind of events or conferences that the EPO and WIPO are producing, definitely I think are generating this sense that there is not the IP how can I say it? They are destroying this idea that the IP system is only for men or mainly for men. The word that the WIPO and EPO and other international organizations and IP offices are promoting is that there is no gender in the IP. And this myth that there is gender, especially talking about inventions, is not only for men, it's also helping because this idea, because at the end, all this is here most of the times. So this idea in Latin America, the IP for men is little by little being eliminated. So this is the last point, the last reason that we identified. Again, as Julio mentioned, we need to conduct maybe PhD studies to identify all the reasons. And this is very difficult, but at least in our understanding after having this conversation with several people, several universities, several IP offices, several IP experts in Latin America, maybe those are the three main reasons.
Okay, thank you, Esteban. Now, Roberta, regarding Europe, have you seen any trends in terms of some sectors being more inclusive than others?
Well, no surprise. We found that we are exactly online to Julio's findings and Esteban's findings, so which is great because we're doing a good job. It means or at least trying to do our best. So indeed, as we said, we see that the inspiring example of Marie Curie is followed by many women. So chemistry is the technology sector with the highest rate of women. And in fact, if you really deep down of a level, even biotechnology has the highest rate of women inventor with 66%, imagine. So you reverse the ratio there, and also pharmaceutical have quite a high rate of women inventors, whereas, as Julio and also Esteban was saying, the area of mechanical engineer and digital science are still pretty low. Another interesting findings that was already mentioned both by Julio and Esteban is that university and public research organization are the most inclusive working environment where women are inventors, present as inventors, with around 20% of women inventors, compared to private business that goes down, according to our study in Europe, down to 10%. So it shows that it's a very inclusive, and it's an environment where women can really explore being inventors in a much more inclusive way. But there is also, there are two good news. The one good news is that we are conducting a study, we're preparing a study looking into patenting activity in universities and in public research institutions, public research organizations. So we're really deep diving, trying to unravel more and understand more about this. But the other good news is that times are changing. And this is what we see with more and more women contributing to all types of fields. Again, that was mentioned by Julio and Esteban. Our European Inventor Award is an event that is a tribute to brilliant minds, brilliant inventors that are tackling humanity's greatest challenges, and is a real testament to this. Let me give you a couple of examples. Katalin Kariko, who doesn't know her? She's our cover lady of our report of 2022. She received a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2022 and the Nobel Prize in 2023. And her inventions about modified mRNA has paved the way for the COVID vaccines, an important contribution to UN SDG 3, good health and well-being. So just imagine where we would be without her. Another great example of humanitarian inventor is Helen Lee. She is the inventor of Samba, which is an affordable and precise way of testing infectious diseases like HIV, hepatitis B, which can be stored at room temperature. And she has changed the lives of many people in developing countries. Again, a great inventor who believes in doing well whilst doing good. But we see it also in the youngest generation. We have a Young Inventor Prize. And let me take the example of Erin Smith from the US. She's a young scientist who developed an AI-powered app that enables early detection of Parkinson's diseases, just looking at the expression of the face. And many other. Filipa de Souza Rocha from Brazil. She has created through Lego ways to teach to visually impaired children to code. So truly incredible work coming from these women, and they are a true role model for young inventors, and they prove that time and time again, innovation knows no barriers, no gender, and actually women are unstoppable.
I have to agree. So due to time, Julio, I was going to ask you 3 questions, but I'll try to summarize it in one. We had great findings when we see some countries as Spain, Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and Egypt. But Asia also grew really fast when we talk about gender gap, and especially Japan. Do you know if they implement new policies or procedures to account for this improvement?
They did. We were very surprised, right? Because you mentioned at the beginning that we did a study in 2016, and we revisited the study 2 years ago, a little bit less than 2 years ago. And in 2016, one of the worst students in our study was Japan, right? And remember, again, we checked the data and everything, right? Japan is a big actor in the IP system and the WIPO, so we wanted to get it right. But the results were consistent and even recognized by the Japanese. Then we do the new study and we observe a big increase. They're still not completely out of the woods, as nobody is actually, but it was very impressive, their progress about that. And we were very surprised. And then we did a webinar, but we did a series of webinars on discussing the metrics, but also the policies on IP and gender, innovation and gender. And we did it by region, and we invited a very senior scholar in Japan, Mrs. Watanabe, and she was explaining all the policies they put into place in the last 10 years, and it was amazing. So, I will not be fair with all the policies if I pick one, but it was a very conscious effort from science and technology, but also industry, to try to improve that. So the good news is that policy works, right? If you have policymakers that put their heads onto it, they can make a change. The less good news is that, of course, miracles do not happen in 1 second, right? We're not going to get parity next year. But it was very, very impressive, and actually that made us start documenting policies. We are not done with that research, but we want to establish a database of policies, trying to see which ones of those policies were more meaningful, because that's another tricky part. You can list 5, 10 policies in a country or an institution, but it's hard to know which ones are more effective. And you know, Roberta was mentioning excellent actions and all very, very important, but some of our member states, they do not have the same capacity that EPO has to put into place all of this. And we will try our best to try to document this in order to inform them what are the most efficient, or, you know, those that have a ratio between the limited resources they may have and the concrete impact they may have as well.
Great, thank you. Roberta, coming back to you again, what has the EPO done in terms of implement new policies for closing the gender gap in the patenting?
Yes, thank you, Idala. Well, let's say that the EPO is deeply committed to share patent knowledge, and women are beneficiaries of a range of free EPO tools. For example, Espasnet with over 10 million visits in 2023, which ensures accessibility from east to west 24/7. And this reaches women and actually the public at large, students, everybody, irrespective of their personal circumstances. But we know from feedback that women appreciate particularly this, as this can give them access to patent information all over and at any time of the globe. We also democratize knowledge with economic studies, providing valuable insights on disruptive technologies with Espasnet platforms. Espasnet platforms are quite interesting. They contain ready-made search strategies designed by our experts to access easily information contained in patents addressing specific technologies on humanity's greatest challenges. Our first one was on fighting coronavirus. We have a second one on clean energy technologies, firefighting, and the most recent one has been on technologies combating cancers. And this is another tool where, as a researcher, you can access easily every time of the day and 24/7 this kind of information. We know that these tools are accessible and appreciated. We also support the development of patent knowledge through our Patent Academy, that is the external training arm. And it's, again, shows to have quite an impact if you think that in 2023, we offered over 1,600 trainings and to more than 26,000 lifelong learners. And what was incredible is in 2028, we were proud to host learners from over 180 countries. So the extension of where the good can be done when you can connect from all over the world is evident. I also wanted to say that the endeavor of the commitment to sharing knowledge and quality of education, we're not alone. We heard from WIPO, but the great news is that also with the USPTO and the Japanese Patent Office, we joined forces with a common commitment for UN SDG 4 in the endeavor of ensuring inclusive and equitable quality of education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. Now, this then, when we look internally to our internal activities to promote a more inclusive ecosystem, we have just launched our new strategic plan in 2028, where we are committed to reach 40% of staff that are women. And for a technical organization, it is not so easy, but we are well on our way, as we are around 32% now, and also 40% managers as women by 2028. And to do this, we take a number of measures. We attract best female talents, promote inclusive recruitment. We go to the job development fairs and practices. Our Young Professional Program, which is a 3-year program for fresh graduates, is a testament to this commitment. We have an average of 62% women in this group, and they are next generation ambassador, if you want. We have also tradition to promote women in STEM through International Women's Day. We joined the USPTO together with 36 IP organizations for a common statement on Get STEM Powered. We celebrate Girls' Day, which is a powerful way to host over 100 girls in our sites, The Hague and Munich, to show them what STEM means, innovation means. And these are all little steps. And I think it's worthwhile thinking, because every part of the ecosystem can implement also these measures, which takes you a step further. We're also looking at our legal framework, modernizing our legal framework. For example, we're looking at parenthood, which is a concept that is modernizing, as today we have a completely new concept of parenthood. So this is all part of being more modern and more inclusive.
Great, perfect. As we have like five minutes to go, I'd like to read for you some 3 questions we had from the audience. I think it will be like a good way to complement what we already have said. As Esteban is a great researcher, and you know, how do you find, I have the first one for you, Esteban. How do you find the gender of inventor, and is there any privacy constraints in asking gender of inventor while submitting the patent application?
Well, the first thing is that we need to remember at the end, we work with patents already granted. So the information is basically public in terms of that information is part of the application, should be open to everybody. So at the end, the way we identify after gathering the names of the inventors was by developing a new code with our programming system. And we take advantage also of the gender dictionary generated by the WAPO, which definitely was a very important tool. Otherwise, like generating this dictionary would take us like several months or maybe years. And by doing this, we identify the names of the women, and we also identify the number. There are also some names that are not part of the dictionary, which is normal because there are many names in the world, and especially because there is some people naming the babies with names such as Wipe or weird names such as Michael Jackson or those kind of things. But at the end, this was the best way we conducted by using, again, the dictionary and using the code that we prepare for this research. And very important, the information of the names is in the application. And after the patents are granted, you can have access to this information. You can use the platforms like EPO, the WIPO, or even Google, or the national IP database.
Okay, great, thank you. The third question that we received is quite nice for Roberta. She was previously pretending to talk about it, so it's a nice fit. Roberta, what lever does EPO have to try and have gender gap reduced in countries where women are not encouraged to pursue higher education studies? You are, it's okay.
Now I'm back to life. So first, let me thank the person who put the question, because it's a very relevant question, and especially in some areas of the world, we are aware that this is happening. So we work on a different level, at level of providing access to IP education with our EP Academy that is open to everyone. So irrespective of whether you are encouraged in your country or not, you can access this tool. Equally, you can access Espacenet irrespective of the circumstances. So you can do it from home. You can do it when you have free space. And this is one thing. So this commitment to provide education worldwide is one element. But the other element is the work that we do with the states, with the governments, which is one trying to promote the commitment to knowledge, to provide areas where people can consult, like patent lab space, PatLib spaces, where people can go and get information on how the IP innovation works, the IP system works, and also again trying to with diplomatic missions to approach the different countries in the world, because effectively the EPO is made of 39 member states, but has also cooperation with states beyond the EPO. Let me mention Tunisia, let me mention Morocco, and well beyond. So this is a continuous commitment that we have, to really bring the government closer to appreciating how IP supports innovation.
Great, thank you. We have more questions. Unfortunately, the time is not on our side. You can feel free to send the questions to AIPPI websites and social medias. Julio and the other panelists, Roberta and Esteban, will be glad to answer. And so I would like to thank you, Esteban, Roberta, and Julio, for sharing your insight and expertise today. It has been an incredibly informative session of the state of gender diversity and innovation in intellectual property. We know it's not the best scenario, but we are getting better every time. So to end, I would like to ask you to give us a sentence to think about at home when we talk and when we think about this matter.
Okay, in which order? Shall I go first?
You can go first, Julio.
Okay. Well, it's tough to summarize everything in one sentence, but I guess in line of our work in WPO and many of the other places, including EPO, I would summarize that there is hope, but much work is needed. That's, I think, what represents what we are seeing in this field.
Great. Your time now, Esteban. I'll let the women to say at last.
If I may continue on this part, because it's really nice link, is that we all, in whatever role we are, being as an IP organization or patent attorneys or the applicants being companies, but also be individual women, we all need to empower all, because all voices within the ecosystem need to be heard to achieve gender parity, from classrooms to career, and that takes all the forces joined together.
Great, amazing. Now you, Esteban.
Well, I think it is important to have in mind, I would like to close with this, the responsibility of increasing the number of women inventing is not only part of the government, not even only limited to the EPO or the WIPO or the public institutions or international institutions. At the end, this is the responsibility of all of us, including, in my case, the NGOs. We also need to collaborate in order to produce the results that are expected. Otherwise, keeping in mind that this is the responsibility only of the government is definitely a mistake. This is the responsibility of my NGO, the responsibility of the universities, public and private, the companies, etc. So all of us are responsible. And what I see is that there is something already changing. So we need to keep working really hard and try to collaborate more with, especially, for example, in this case, with NGOs. And just thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here with Julio, Roberta, and Idala, and thank you very much to the organization for this event.
Thank you all. As a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, it was a pleasure. AIPPI D&I Committee, dismantling, we are going to have our third webinar, so keep it in mind. It's going to be about dismantling stigmas about mental health and IP, resources and support for all webinar on 19 August 2024. Keep an eye out for AIPPI's LinkedIn and email communications for further details. And we would like you to remember about the AIPPI World Congress that's going to happen in Hangzhou. In the early bird registrations goes until 9 July. Pay attention if you need a visa to go to China. So early bird is a nice opportunity to avoid any problems. So see you next time.
Thank you, Idala.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.